I think it started when I was a real wee child because my father was an alcoholic and kind of a lost human being. And he used to always lose his job also because he didn't like to be bossed around or told what to do.
To know a little bit more about you as a person. Then we're going to get into the human potential movement and how it started. And I'd really love to hear a little bit more about who Marcia is. What are some things that would really be important for them to know about you?
Well, I think I'm a lot of fun and I love animals and I
Mm,
love being with friends and traveling. I travel all over the world. I love adventure and discovery and learning new things. And I love learning
mm.
myself, just like continually growing. I think that that's a really important thing for a human being to do. And I'm a very loyal friend.
Eh, Would you say the learning is something that has been a part of you and a part of your life since like you were young, or do you feel like that happened later in life? And I ask that because I
Oh,
failed reading when I was in middle school because I hated reading. I just didn't like it. It was just one of those things, like the books weren't interesting me. But now, this year, I read over 6,000 pages. It's one of those things that are learned. So when it comes to learning, developing, self development, just growing yourself, where was like the birthplace for you where you're like, dang, okay, this learning thing is pretty important?
when I was a real wee child, because my father was an alcoholic and kind of a lost human being. And he used to always lose his job also because he didn't like to be bossed around or told what to do. And so someday he would always say something that he shouldn't have, and then he would lose his job, and he would come home that day and say, "We have to move." And so most of my young life was spent going from school to school to school. I went to two or three schools a year until I was a sophomore in high school. And what would happen is because it was so great at school, and that's where life was good, that's where it was fun, that's where it was safe. And so I think that, part of my survival mechanism was to continue to learn. And then that also endeared me to my teachers. And so I became teacher's pet, sort of, or most popular student, and those kinds of things. And so a lot of my activity in life was around education, around growing, and around mentors that acknowledged me and appreciated me for that. So it's been there for a long time.
Mm, that's beautiful. Catch me up to speed on this as far as going from this avid, teacher's pet learner, turning this into a platform. I mean, you have a really beautiful platform that serves hundreds of thousands of people across the world. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, you correct me if I'm wrong. Landmark, you were a part of the Landmark Forum before Landmark was Landmark. If I'm not mistaken, is that right?
I worked and knew Werner Erhard before we started EST, Erhard Seminars Training, which became
Mm,
Landmark Forum. I took Werner's very first training. He'd never done any trainings ever. And there were 20 of us in that first workshop. And from that moment, he
mm,
asked me to be part of the team. And there were about five of us, mostly women, that built EST. And I was the senior vice president for 10 years from the inception of EST, which happened after I came to work for Werner, until 10 years later. And so I started with 20 people as graduates, and we ended up with millions and millions worldwide. And mostly that was my job, to fill trainings. I was in charge of communication,
mm.
registration, and production. So my job was to fill the trainings, train the trainers in sales and presentation skills, and handle all the enrollment and sales and marketing and PR for the EST organization, which, as you said, became Landmark.
If you're listening right now, Landmark, you probably have heard of it. I mean, it is the largest. Anytime I hear Landmark, I'm a big Tony Robbins guy, so I'm like, yeah, there's like Landmark, and then there's like Tony Robbins, and it's like these are two big, giant personal growth arenas for people that serve the millions. And you're talking that you started when there was like 20 people.
Yeah.
Like that's really remarkable. I am so interested in what are some of the things you experienced? I mean, the people that have come through Landmark, between the relationships, the people, the topics, the growth of that organization. I'm sure there's tons of lessons, and I would love to kind of pick that apart just a smidge if you're willing to talk about that. Would that be all right?
Sure. Well, what's really interesting
So,
is that when I left EST after 10 years, I was quite famous. people would stop me on the street in New York and ask for my autograph, literally. And, because I was the
Mm.
face of EST, because I was in charge of enrollment and sales. So I was always the one that introduced Werner at the big special events. We started off by leading guest seminars and talking to guests in the bedroom of an apartment condo. And Werner would teach the graduates in a circle on the floor in the living room. And then I would take the guests into the bedroom and I would sit on the dresser and they would sit on the bed. And then I would tell them about the training and enroll them into it. And that turned into, then we did hotel rooms, and then we did auditoriums at hotels and conventions. And then we did like the Cow Palace with 20,000 people. It was my job to fill it and produce it and train the people how to organize it and do the logistics in it and train the speakers how to speak at it and all of those things. So it was quite extraordinary, lessons learned all the way through. But interesting, when I left EST, because I was so well known at what I had done and taking along with Werner and helping him and the other executives to create that incredible organization to the place that we did, a lot of other leaders came to me to ask me to work with them, one of which was Tony Robbins. And so I ran Tony
Mm.
Robbins' company for 2 years in the mid 80s and helped take him national. He was on the West Coast at the time, and I helped him train all of his enrollment and staff and team in communication and leadership and sales and public speaking. So I know Tony very well.